Hey guys, this is Mr. V over here doing a book review today for Prisoners of the Castle by Ben Macintyre. This is a non-fiction book about a POW camp during World War II under Nazi Germany. You want to know that this is a POW camp, not a concentration camp. So, this is definitely a very interesting book because he chose this specific prison, Colditz, and he starts it in 1939, but it's a very interesting prison because this prison was thought to be inescapable. Because even if you see the pictures in the beginning of the book and he shows you some pictures, the walls are very high. He describes the prison and it just seems to be inescapable. It's been around for a long time, this type of castle-like feel. And it's a very interesting prison because not only is it thought to be inescapable, but the prisoners that are sent there are generally the higher profile prisoners or the prisoners who have tried to escape other camps or who have already escaped other camps. So that's why it's a very interesting book. And despite it thought to be inescapable, there were many prisoners who tried to escape in this camp, and some of them even did escape. And that's why it's a very interesting look into this book, and he goes in detail about that. So that's what's very interesting about it, because it is very crazy just reading about these escapes. It read very well, but it's very crazy reading about it and just seeing the type of things that they did, whether it be disguises or tunneling out, or being put into a mattress and being shipped out. And there's many different types of escapes and ways people thought to escape this POW camp under Nazi control, and just what they did and the extremes that they went through to try escape. And it's just very interesting. And they just did such creative things to try escape, and there's many different types, and that's why I don't want to go too far in detail about that. But what also was interesting about this book was it was interesting looking into the prisoner's life. I mean, of course, it is tough reading about their food or all that, but it's interesting looking into the prisoner's life to see what they did, how they still try to entertain themselves and the things they did like that. But also, one of the most interesting things I found was that there was a hierarchy system in the prison. And it was very interesting because this prison had all different types of prisoners. There was French prisoners, Dutch prisoners, British prisoners, Polish prisoners. So it had all different types. Yet there was a hierarchy system among it, in that depending on what your rank was outside of the prison, you were treated better among other prisoners. And there was even prisoners serving the other prisoners type of thing because you were ranked higher outside of the prison. So that's what's very interesting for me to read. And it was also interesting seeing how some of the guards treated some of the prisoners better based off of how high they were ranked outside, because they may have been better to negotiate in terms of the Nazis knew we could probably get someone better, so they would treat this one prisoner better because they'd have a better negotiating tool. So it was very interesting reading that. Those are things I didn't think about when I started this book. And it was also interesting reading. I said there was all different countries prisoners were in this book, and there was many prisoners from each country. And it was very interesting to see how the different countries treated each other. And it was very interesting seeing that way, because the countries all the French prisoners all got together, the British prisoners all got together, the Polish prisoners all got together type of thing, and how they treated each other nicely, yet they were still distant. And it was very interesting reading it, but especially because this is a book about escaping this prison, and how they formed this organization to oversee all the escapes, in secret, all the prisoners. And they had to form this organization and to kind of clear, can you escape? And it would be the French prisoners would have to go to the committee and be okay, we're planning this escape. I just want you to know we're planning this escape. And they would somewhat work together. And, it would only be those French prisoners that are escaping. They would not allow the British or anything like that. But they would let them know, because if they didn't let them know, then the guards would sometimes discover it, because they would, there's things that they messed up on. So that's why they needed this organization. And it was very interesting how they semi-worked together and they semi-trusted each other, yet they didn't let them know the full extent. They would just say, okay, we're thinking of escaping through this room and we're thinking of doing it this way, but they didn't let them know too much because they didn't want to be discovered. but that's why like they semi-worked together. And it was also interesting in that there was still betrayal. You know, like sometimes if the British knew the French were trying to escape a certain way and they just pissed them off, they just told the guards, or, you know, there was still things like that happening. And it was just interesting because it reminds me somewhat of how like countries treat each other, about how, you know, they will work together, yet they won't let the other countries know everything about it, and they still have their own country's interests in mind, type of thing. And it kind of reminded me of that. So it was just very interesting reading about that. And, you know, overall, I thought this book had very interesting stories, because I said there was many different escape attempts. Some of them really did work. But it was just interesting stories. But it was also interesting facts about escaping. There was interesting facts about the smuggling or the bartering system that they used in there, even with the guards, how they would barter with the guards, or how some of these prisoners were good at lock picking. And there was an amazing section about like the coded letters and how they got letters out of the prison, but how they would code them and how creative it was and how they were coding them. Like, it's a mind-boggling way that they even devote a whole section in the appendix to explain it. And it's so mind-boggling that it was not even known until after the war was over. Then they told them how it was done. And it was just really crazy. And it was crazy that they even had, like, the Germans even had spies in the prison to try to figure things out. And it was just a very interesting read and a crazy read in those regards. And it even read like fiction at times. It read like fiction because you saw how they treated each other with the prisoners, how they treated each other, but also like the escapes seemed like movies. You know, they're in this prison, and this is supposed to be an inescapable prison, yet they're still digging their way out, or they're still trying to like get these disguises, and they're still trying to get their way out. And that's why it felt like a movie at times. And it was just crazy. Yet it was also crazy thinking that this was real life, that this really did happen in the 1940s under Nazi control. And it's also sad to realize that it was real life. But it was just a very interesting read in those regards. Before getting into this read, I think it did help having a general knowledge of what was going on in World War II, because you don't need to know much, but you definitely want to know how Germany was doing throughout the war, as it helped knowing, you know, how powerful Germany was in 1942, 43, because it showed how the prisoners were treated, and, you know, the things they would hear, because the prisoners still got information from the outside. Yet you want to know that compared to how Germany was in like 1944 or 1945, basically when Germany knew it was going to lose, and how they were treated, how the prisoners were treated, but what the prisoners decided to do when they kind of knew Germany was going to lose. And it made you wonder, like, especially when you got to the section of 1945, like what the Germans were going to do, like what these officers were going to do. Were the officers going to take off? Were the officers going to kill the prisoners? What happens? And, you know, it's just, that's why I say it helps knowing a little bit of history as you get through the book. And then one of the things I did not like in the book was there was sometimes I felt it was a little long at times, because he goes in depth about many different escapes and escape attempts. But there are many escape attempts, and, you know, there's only so many you can sometimes take, and that's why he goes a little in depth at times, or it drags a little bit at times. But, you know, I still thought that was like one of the only things I didn't like. Now, as for his writing style, I thought his writing style was very good. It was very well written, in that it was just very straightforward writing. As he basically just lets you know what happens, how the people escape, if they were caught before, what happened after they escaped, because there were people that did escape. Some people did get out, but what happened? Did they make it all the way to the border, get out of Germany, type of thing? You know, what happens? And he lets you know about the betrayals, the suspicions, if guards caught, they sometimes discovered things before the escape. He lets you know all that, and it's just very straightforward and very interesting, and it's very easy to understand. I would say this was basically like a high school level reading, so it's very easy to understand. There's nothing complex. So, you know, it's very easy read, and he was very well researched throughout it, because he talks about what happens during it, and some of these things were released, the information was known after the war was done. Then more was released, like how they got the messages out or the escapes that they did. So it was very well researched, and he even lets you know what happens to the people after the war is over, after the thing is done, like what happened to the guards, who was put on trial or what happened to them. So that's why it's definitely a very well-researched book. So if you're interested in reading the book about these like prison camps in World War II, I'd say this is definitely a good read. But I would say that you would probably want to read this book if you're interested in World War II. You'd want to be interested in World War II or want to be interested in the World War II prison camps before reading this book. But overall, I still thought this was a very fun or interesting read. If you guys have any comments or questions, please post it in the comment section below. Hope you guys click the subscribe button, as I always upload multiple different types of book reviews today. But thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy reading.